are locked into the Cowbell Kingdom podcast, frontline coverage of the Sacramento Kings.
Welcome to the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. I am James Ham. With me, as always, Mr. Jonathan Santiago, and we're gonna fly solo without a guest tonight because we have a lot to talk about. You know, we had media day on Friday, followed by training camp opening up on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They had a day off. But a lot to talk about, John. It's been a good week. It's been a good week of Kings coverage.
Yeah, this is an interesting team, James. Clearly, the roster, I think, still could use some tweaks, but I don't know. You can kind of just see
it's growing on you. It's growing on you.
Not the roster. The roster isn't really growing on me. The culture of the franchise seems to be growing on me. I think you see that, things are stabilized now. This is the time where you can see the fruits of the new ownership starting to bear, starting to like flourish, so to speak, because there's just stability around the organization now. And, the players that they've brought in are solid guys. I like Darren Collison. I may not think that he's, the best point guard in the world or one of the top point guards in the NBA, but he has been doing, everything that the Kings need him to do, and he's been a very good leader. Ramon Sessions is a good addition to this team. Ryan Hollins, he may not even play much for the Sacramento Kings, but his presence, I think, will help because he's been on winning teams before. And then you got Carl Landry back, who, being around Carl this past week, he's just, you knew him more so the first year you covered him and before he was traded for Marcus Thornton, more so than I. But he's just so energetic and he seems very happy and enthusiastic and ready to get back on the court. And it's positive energy to have in that locker room.
Yeah, Carl is one of the true good guys of the NBA. He really is a good guy. He's always got a smile. He's always got time. He's always honest. I really like his honesty. Because a lot of these guys, I talked to one of the young players during media day, and I swear I've never seen anything so perfectly laid out. I think there were like 14 consecutive cliches he threw at me in a row. And I was like, without even like breaking stride, just cliche, 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 cliche. You're like, holy cow, look, you're just stringing them all together. I'm going to, fight for my minutes and I'm going to do what's best for the team. And just one after another after another. I'm just like, holy cow, how did that happen? It's almost like he rehearsed it. But I like this team, John. You're right. The culture is changing. I don't think that this is like a world-beating team, but it's growing on me. I hate saying that because, we cover this team. We've covered this team for a long time, but the dynamic that they've brought in here is just so different than it's been in the past. And I guess basically, what I see from this team is that in the past they've tinkered with, let's bring in X player to work with DeMarcus Cousins and to be his support system. And, for a long time, Francisco Garcia was the leader of this team. He was the godfather of this team. I've talked about this in the past on the podcast. There was a real interesting feel around Francisco Garcia, and you could see anytime someone had an issue, they would go to Garcia for counsel. He doesn't talk a lot to the media. He doesn't say a lot, but he was really the guy that everyone would go to and sort of have their deep conversations, especially when they needed, they were in trouble, like be it on the floor or off the floor, girl trouble or whatever it might be. Francisco Garcia was your guy. And then they started bringing in these guys because they thought it might work with DeMarcus. Like, let's bring in Chuck Hayes. Let's bring in Chuck Hayes and see if, he went to Kentucky. DeMarcus went to Kentucky. They had to have met each other before. Let's bring him in. He's a positive influence. He's a veteran. He might be the next Vlade Divac. And it falls flat on his face. And, they reach out, they bring in, they make a deal to bring in Patrick Patterson. Again, another guy who played with DeMarcus and Cousins. I don't think I saw those guys together once the entire season. And so you kept like trying to piece this thing together where you were adding support. And then this offseason, while it was sneaky how they did it, they kind of flooded the team with guys who've been in the league 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years, and who are all around, 27, 28 years of age, and who have all been on teams that have flourished. And they're trying to build a larger safety net for DeMarcus. And I think it's had a positive influence. Reggie Evans, of course, is like the old man. He's 34. He's played in the league 13 years. And DeMarcus loves Reggie Evans. But again, you bring in Sessions, you bring in Hollins, you bring in Collison. You've got Omri Caspi. You even see some growth out of Jason Thompson, and you see this package coming together. Carl Landry, and it's like a family of guys that can take turns being a support group for all of the young players on this team, not just DeMarcus Cousins. Because in the end, I mean, this isn't just about DeMarcus. I mean, Ben McLemore really, really young. Nick Stauskas, super young. Derek Williams, again, super young, super athletic, huge upside. Eric Moreland. I mean, there are a lot of young players on this team. Ray McCallum, who needs support. I mean, in the past, who did Isaiah Thomas learn to play the NBA point guard game from? There was nobody. I mean, you had guys that were coming in and then getting waived, guys like Aaron Brooks. It was just throwing things together and hoping it worked out, and no support for young players. And at this point, I really like the support group that they've built.
Well, another thing too, James, I mean, this is something we talked about with our friend Jason Jones of the Sacramento Bee. You've brought in guys who understand their roles. They know who they are. Reggie Evans, I'm going to come in and just rebound and play defense, just be a scrappy player. That's my role. And I'm going to be a guy like he's embraced the role to be that guy, the sounding board for DeMarcus. Whereas in the past, you've had guys like you bring in a Chuck Hayes. Chuck Hayes, yeah, he tried, but he wasn't fully committed to it. I don't think.
He wasn't committed to the job of fixing and helping DeMarcus Cousins become a pro.
Exactly. He wasn't fully committed to that. I think Reggie Evans, he's at a stage in his life and in his career where he's going into his 13th season in the NBA, and he's been around a lot of great players, and he sees, the talent in DeMarcus. They're both guys from the South. Reggie's from Florida and DeMarcus is from Alabama. And, he's accepted that. And I think in the past, there haven't been guys who have been willing to do that, because it's been very hard to deal with DeMarcus in the past when things aren't going well, because he's such an emotional guy and he wears his heart on his sleeve. And when they lose, he takes losses very personally. And sometimes it comes out wrong. It's communicated wrong to his teammates. And so you have a guy who understands who this personality is, who DeMarcus Cousins is as a man, and is willing to take not just the good, but the bad in him and work with it and help him reach his potential. And again, guys who know their roles. Darren Collison, he's not coming in here to average 20 points and 6 assists. He's here to run this team, be a veteran, provide leadership, take young guys like Nick Stauskas, Ben McLemore under his wing and show them the ropes. And he's done that. Guy like Ryan Hollins, another dude who comes in, he knows he may play 10 minutes a night, if that. I mean, he probably at this point is the emergency backup power forward and center behind Carl Landry and Jason Thompson and Reggie Evans. So, but he's been on teams that have had success in the NBA, and it helps in terms of developing the culture. Now, talent-wise, is this team, are we saying this team is going to push for the playoffs? I don't think so, but I think this is a team that is primed for much improvement, more than what a lot of people are expecting. I know that the Vegas odds makers have them at the line is at 30.5 wins, and
The
I
over
like
up,
that. If I
yeah, the over
oh
under. Yeah.
yeah, and personally, I've said that I think this team is a team that can win maybe 31 to 36 games. So if I were a gambling man, I would take the over on that personally
I
because
would take the
I
over
think
as well.
I think they're not, this is a team that may not necessarily, they may not make the playoffs this year, but I think you will see, um, an establishment of culture here in Sacramento.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring up two things with two of the players you talked about. Number one, Reggie Evans. DeMarcus Cousins talked about this. Reggie Evans, the other thing, besides the fact that Reggie Evans has been in the league forever, Reggie Evans has also gone through major phases in his career where he's been an NBA bad guy, where he's been the guy who got caught reaching over and tugging on somebody's nether regions, and a
Chris
guy,
Kaman.
yeah, who's been called out for being a dirty player and who has bounced around and really had, to earn his money. And I think that's something that DeMarcus loves. It's a guy who's been through a similar type of attack on his personality. And so DeMarcus really feels like sort of kindred spirits with Reggie Evans, and he was really excited when he got him last year, and he's even more excited now. Now the other guy, Hollins, what people don't realize is that Ryan Hollins I think he's been in the league 9 years, and he's played with some of the greatest players the game has, right? He played with the Celtics with Kevin Garnett. He played in Dallas with Dirk Nowitzki. He played last year with the Clippers with Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul. I mean, this guy has really played with some solid NBA superstars all over the place, and he knows what it takes. He's watched those guys work. He's seen what they do to like go from being a really good player to a great player to an all-world player, especially Garnett, Nowitzki, Griffin, Paul. I mean, those guys are future Hall of Famers probably, and he's seen the little extras that they have to put in, and he talked to us about that at after practice the other day, and I thought it was really interesting for him to say, look, if you want to be one of those guys, it can't be all this mess. You have to do everything in your power. It's eating right. It's practicing right. It's getting sleep and showing up on time and taking young players under your wing and doing everything in your power to make your team better. It's all of these little things. It's a way that you practice. It's a way that you treat your teammates. And that's something that DeMarcus is like getting a chance to learn from some really solid guys. And also, DeMarcus talked to us about like him and this group of veterans like going out to lunch and literally having discussions on like leadership and how it is that you treat people and how you earn respect. And I thought, DeMarcus came over to the media. We had to wait forever for him. God bless his soul. It's kind of like when you sit in the Houston Rockets locker room and Dwight Howard and James Harden literally take 40 minutes when you're on a 45-minute deadline before they come out. And then when they do come out of the shower, they literally both talk at the same time so you can't get them both. And DeMarcus kind of did that, but when he did come out, my goodness, John, he was good. The best that I've ever seen DeMarcus Cousins. When you get DeMarcus talking, he can really be intriguing. He's a really, really bright guy when he's focused and he wants to talk. And he was good. He gave us a solid like 12, 14 minutes of, sort of DeMarcus Cousins unplugged.
Yeah, and I've been telling you that's what I encountered with him at Team USA training camp. He was very gracious with his time, and he was saying some good things, saying the things that you want to hear from him. Obviously, saying something is different from the actions. At this point, it's
Of course.
actions speak louder than words. But he has some actionable experience behind him. Some experience under his belt to say, look, I'm not only talking the talk, I'm walking the walk. I made Team USA. I accepted a role. I did not gripe about not starting for that team. I played a key role off that bench and was
Played defense.
yeah, played defense and excelled at it. So he's starting to build it up. It's just going to take some time, and I think the key for him is just realizing that it will take time. It's honestly just a career long process. I believe I've said that numerous times in the past. And it's never going to stop with him. He
Yeah.
always has to keep building it up, building positivity in his direction, because there's always going to be the past. It's unfortunate, but you don't if you forget about the past, if he doesn't focus on the past and just continues to do what he's doing now, he can reach his potential, and he's on his way. He's doing the right things now. He's saying the right things, and he's also showing it at the same time.
Yeah, I'll say this. Okay, so we don't talk about this a lot, but there's plenty of times where like DeMarcus Cousins and I don't see eye to eye. He doesn't like something I write. We don't talk. He won't answer questions. He gets upset. I mean, it happens. I mean, we're in an NBA locker room. When we write something, I hope people understand that, like, when we write something on Cowbell Kingdom, we're there on the ground, and we are fully, we have to accept if a player doesn't like something we write, and yes, the players do read what we write. Plenty of them do, but if they don't like something we write, we have to actually answer for that with them sometimes. We have to go in there and we have to take our lumps, or we have to go through a player not wanting to have conversations with us. It happens, and it's accountability. It's accountability on both sides for them and for us. And so I'm just gonna get that out of the way. So like when I talk about him coming out and having a good conversation, I was totally impressed with him standing there and fielding questions. The other thing, I'll say this. I asked a question about Jason Thompson and other veterans, and he answered the question, and he sort of skipped over Jason Thompson and didn't talk about Jason Thompson. He talked about sort of the veterans and how they're not just there for him, they're there for the whole team, and he had an answer. And then I came back with the second question, and he said, you know what, I want to go back because he didn't talk about Jason Thompson. And, he was very deliberate to say, like, look, Jason Thompson, first of all, has been a star of camp. And we heard that from Malone as well. We'll get into Jason Thompson in a couple of minutes. But he said, look, after everything that Jason Thompson has been through in this organization, 70 plus players he played with. This is, Malone is his fifth coach in now 7 years, but fifth coach in 6 years. He's lost his job to a million different people only to take it back. We've talked about this a million times. J.J. Hickson, Samuel Dallenberg. I mean, we can go through the list. It just takes forever. Thomas Robinson, guys that they've brought in to take his job. But Jason Thompson came in and looked great, and DeMarcus Cousins went out of his way to say, look, after everything Jason Thompson's been through, for him to be able to push that aside and live in the moment and just be here in the moment I'm really happy for him. And I looked at DeMarcus Cousins while he was saying that, and he was being honest. He wasn't trying to, like, prop up a guy that he hasn't seen eye to eye with over the last few
Yeah.
years. And I thought it was such a mature and such a sign of growth from Cousins for him to acknowledge the work that Jason Thompson has put in, the attitude that Jason Thompson came in with. Because look, Jason Thompson thought he was getting traded 5 or 6 times in the last 8 months, 10 months. There was no way Jason Thompson thought he was coming back to training camp here in Sacramento, and sure enough, here he is. But just to finish up on DeMarcus, for him to acknowledge a guy again who he hasn't always seen eye to eye with, I thought was a huge positive sign for me.
Yeah, and that's the one thing you can always count on with DeMarcus. I think what he says and how he expresses himself is how he feels. And so it's not like, sometimes you talk to certain guys and like you said, they kind of give you the cliche answer, or they kind of
Your spidey
you know
senses are tingling. You don't,
yeah, you put
it doesn't feel right. What they're saying and what you see on the court doesn't match up. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think when he said that it was sincere, is genuine, and everything that he says, it's just how he feels. Because even I was listening back to the tape, and I completely missed this when he was talking about his lunch with Ryan Hollins, Reggie Evans, and Darren Collison. He pointed out how he was learning some things about their experience with other great players, and he didn't say his name, but he also said I'm paraphrasing here, you learn some things about guys who get credit that don't really deserve the credit.
Yes.
And you can tell he was talking about, I knew from right away he's talking about Chris Paul, because all three of those guys have played with Chris Paul, and they probably talked to him about how great of a leader Chris Paul is. And so we know that DeMarcus doesn't really like Chris Paul that much, but that's just how he feels. And, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just his opinion of things. But again, like that's just how he feels. He's honest about, what he thinks about something. He's not the type of person who's going to, kind of give you a cookie cutter answer. And again, like you said, it was impressive for him to say that about Jason Thompson, because those two guys, over the time that they've been together, yes, they've
4
started.
years.
They've started together, they've started in the front court together, but they haven't seen eye to eye, all the time. There have been many occasions where those two have butted heads behind the scenes, and you guys may not hear about it, but it has happened.
Yes.
But that's also that's not out of the ordinary in any NBA franchise. It's not all hunky dory. Even teams that are winning and are competing for championships, guys butt heads. But again, for those guys, considering the history that they've had where they haven't seen eye to eye in the past, for DeMarcus to say something like that about Jason Thompson is impressive.
Okay, so let's move on to Jason Thompson, because literally, I mean, he is getting anointed as literally the MVP of training camp. He's a true 6'11", and 250 pounds. I would say, if I'm going to guess, he shaved 15 pounds of extra weight off his body and converted that straight to muscle in the offseason. I've never seen Jason Thompson. Jason Thompson always comes into camp in incredible shape. He's always been a hard worker. He's always done what it takes during the summer to improve himself. But my goodness, John, the dude, again, has transformed his body. I don't even know how, he's probably 4% body fat, 3% body fat. That's where I would put him. And when you're looking at 6'11", 250, and you literally, there's no inch to pinch anywhere on that dude, it's incredible to see what he's done. And let's add to that he's realistically, not wanted to be here. He's had a really, everyone is gone. The only other player that is still here from, 16 months ago is DeMarcus Cousins. Everyone else is gone.
Well, granted, at least he's got Omri and Carl back.
Well, he gets Omri, he gets Carl back, yes, but still, I mean, the transformation that we've seen out of Jason Thompson is, once again, nothing short of incredible. And let's add to that, he's added a three-point shot, which I've seen him shoot the three, and then he's also been working on not just a catch and shoot, because he's more of a set shooter in the past, but we watched him on Monday having a shootout with Nick Stauskas. Absolutely killed Nick Stauskas in a shootout on 18 to 20 foot jumpers from the right elbow and the right baseline. Going back.
You mean
and
Derek
forth.
Williams?
No, he beat Derek Williams in the 3-point contest. On Monday, he beat Nick Stauskas in a shootout of 18 to 20 foot jumpers on the right side, and he was rising up and catching the ball, lifting straight up, and shooting jump shots, and nothing but net. Nothing, again, and I think he might have missed one out of 15. Just absolutely scorched Stauskas, and it was impressive. And you saw Malone go over, put his arm on him. They're laughing, they're having a good time. but he put on a show. And again, we saw him shooting three-pointers with Derek Williams and hugely improved. Not just Thompson. Thompson has sort of a flat three-point shot. It's out of his range, I think. I don't think it's something, well, especially like right elbow, top of the key, because Thompson's never going to shoot that shot. If he does shoot a three, it's going to be on the corner. He's going to shoot baseline threes, and we'll see more of those, sort of what Patrick Patterson does and what we've seen out of other players. Omri Caspi is supposed to do that as well. But Thompson realistically has improved his shooting range, improved his body. He looks like a stretch four. He no longer looks like a guy who's just, going to go in the paint and fight it out in the paint. And I think a lot of people around the Kings are now looking at him and saying, I think he's the starting power forward come day one. Maybe I'm wrong, but he sure does look like he's a starter in my eyes right now.
Yeah, I mean, he always comes to camp prepared. It's just a matter of, can he keep it together throughout the entire season? Last year it was tough because he came in, he battled, he outplayed Patrick Patterson, and then Patrick Patterson got the starting job, and I think that affected JT all year long. So it's much like DeMarcus Cousins, right? Like he has to kind of keep things together regardless of the politics that are going on behind the scenes in terms of what the front office wants to do to reshape this roster. But I do find it funny that he's shooting threes, because I can remember, his second year in the league when I was still an intern for the team. I remember talking to JT and asking him, so what did you work on this summer? What are the things that you wanted to add to your game? And he talked about adding a three-point shot, which at the time, this is like everybody should learn how to shoot the corner three, ideal in the NBA and advanced statistics blowing up. And so at the time you think, okay, why would you want to do that? Just, you're 6'11", just stick to playing with your back to the basket. And now these days, I mean, power forwards, they have to be stretch fours, to be successful in this league.
Everyone hits the three. Yeah.
Everyone has to be able to hit the three. So it's ironic now, 6 years later, 7 years later, he's now adding that aspect to his game, or trying to add that aspect to his game when, in the past it was frowned upon.
Well, coming out of Ryder, he was a guy with range. I mean,
he
that's
could
what
shoot.
People forget.
He was like a David West, LaMarcus Aldridge type his first few years in the league. Like he was not. He became the evolution of Jason Thompson as a player is so fascinating to me, because when he came out of college, he was a stretch four. He was shooting threes, the college three at least, for the Bronx. And then when he came here, he had no back to the basket game. You know it, James. He'd always rush his shots around the rim. He had no patience.
There was a lid on the basket. There was a lid on the basket when he was in the paint. Yeah.
And then Carl Landry comes along, and I think JT learned some things from Carl and how patient he was around the rim in terms of scoring on the low post. And now JT's a pretty solid low post scorer, but now in today's NBA, you got to be able to shoot the three as a four-man or even as a big man. So he's trying to add that to his game.
I feel bad for Jason Thompson because, look, number one, he needs 59 games to be the all-time leader in Sacramento Kings history for
That's
games
crazy.
played. For
That's
games
crazy.
played. He is going to be, if he does not get traded this season, he will pass first Mitch Richmond at 517 games, and then Peja Stojakovic at 518 games, and he will be the all-time leader in games played in Sacramento Kings history. That, to me, you're right. It is ludicrous that Jason Thompson, I asked him about it, and he was like, wow, really? He's like, well, I never thought that would happen, especially over the last, year. He thought he would be gone long before here. But for him to, refocus, and again, the problem that I feel so bad for the guy, because when you look at sort of what he does as a player, they just keep bringing in new guys, new coaches, and changing what it is that Jason Thompson has to do as a player again and again and again. And, it's like, look, we want you to be this guy or we want you to be this guy or, please work on this. Well,
And
it's always something different.
he
Yeah.
always does what's asked of him. And
Yeah.
of course, I know a lot of fans, they give him a hard time. They because he does have a tendency to sulk in
Yes.
games, and he does need to work on that. But I can understand why, because he's a guy, like you've said, he's always asked to do something different every year. Paul Westphal says, "We need you to play some small forward. Why did you add all this weight?
I forgot about that.
We need you to we need you to shoot the three." Well, 7 years ago, like, I was working on the three, and then my coach back then, Reggie Theus, didn't want me to shoot threes. So it's very he's had a rough go, and I think Jerry Reynolds said it somewhere. It might have been on the radio or in an interview elsewhere that Jason Thompson has been the most mismanaged player ever in Sacramento Kings history. And if there were some stability, I mean, if he
Yeah.
played for a team like the San Antonio Spurs and they said, "This is your job, this is what you do, this is your role," I mean, where would his career be at this point? He would probably be, I think JT would probably be one of the more heralded role players, solid guys, solid power forward center types in the league. But because he's played for such an unstable franchise, he's just always had to change his game and adapt to Paul Westphal, Keith Smart, Michael Malone, Kenny Nat, Reggie Theus.
Yeah.
It's just a revolving door, and it's been tough for him. And I think some fans, they don't really understand that. They just, when they see him on the court and they see him sulking again and taking bad shots from time to time and losing focus, that's how they think of Jason Thompson. But again, there are things that go on behind the scenes, much like with Marcus Thornton last year, where you ask a guy, he gets paid to be a 20-point per game scorer. And then now you're asking him to be a spot-up shooter and a defensive specialist. Like, that's not what he does. It's not what he does.
No, it's not what he does. And look, just like for an example, Jason Thompson, we don't want to spend all night on Jason Thompson, but look, 2 years ago, Jason Thompson came in and had no left hand. He comes into training camp, and all of a sudden he's hitting left-handed jump hooks left and right. He was spectacular. You're like, look at this in the post. I mean, he shot like, I don't know what it was, 56% from the field, 55% from the field. He's using both hands. He's making spin moves. He's doing all these cool things off the glass. You're like, wow, look at this. He's developing as a post player. Then you get to this last season, and people don't realize this. Kings fans don't realize this. DeMarcus Cousins, the reason why DeMarcus Cousins didn't foul out of games last season was because Michael Malone told those two when they got on the floor together that Jason Thompson will guard the best offensive weapon the other team has. I don't care if it's their center or if it's their power forward, if it's LaMarcus Aldridge or if it's Pekovic or if it's Kevin Love, whoever it is that is the best offensive player that the other team has, that's who Jason Thompson guarded. And Jason Thompson literally was just a guy who worked on defense. And sure, people are like, well, why does he not have any block shots? It's like, well, because there is no weak side shot blocking when you're dealing with Kevin Love, when you're or LaMarcus Aldridge, when you're trying to defend a fall away 18-foot jumper from Aldridge, or you're chasing Kevin Love at the three-point line. There is no rebound numbers. You don't get all of these extra block shots or anything else. And the other thing is, on the other end of the floor, this team froze him out. So you can blame whoever you want, Isaiah Thomas, Rudy Gay, when they played together, DeMarcus Cousins. They froze Jason Thompson out. So on one end of the floor, he had to guard the best guy. On the other end of the floor, it was, get out of our way. We got three guys who are going for 20 tonight, and you ain't one of them. And that is exactly, that's why Jason Thompson didn't want to be here anymore. It's not that he hates Sacramento. It's not that he doesn't like the coach. It's just, that's what it is. He needed to be, he needs to be part of the overall game plan because he is still a guy who believes he can score.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Jason Thompson this year. Again, I think we kind of come in every season feeling a little bit optimistic. Heck, we were optimistic. Keith Smart's second year, first full year coming into the helm, coming into Sacramento as head coach of the Kings. But I think realistically, you do see, again, there's stability here, so they can make a little bit of progress. Again, not playoffs. I don't think this is a playoff team at all at this point. They're a couple pieces away from being that. But, you just want to see growth and improvement out of the roster and out of guys specifically like DeMarcus Cousins, Ben McLemore, young players, Nick Stauskas, Ray McCallum, things like that.
Yeah, John, I don't think that this team. I mean, I think they're on the right path. I think adding all these veterans was a good thing. I'm not sure where we're at. You're right. I'm not sure where we're at in this process, but yeah, I actually I've said this a couple of times now. They are growing on me. The Ramon Sessions pickup to me was spectacular. He's a guy who goes right at the rim, who really gets other teams in foul trouble, who knows his role. Omri Caspi is a completely different player, a different personality. I knew Omri really well when he was here before, and now he's older. He's been through a lot. He's a minimum salary guy. He's been so this is a different team.
Yeah, you don't have a bunch of guys trying to prove themselves anymore at this point. You have guys, like I said earlier, who fit roles. You don't have a Dante Green versus Omri Caspi, young up and coming small forwards trying to prove themselves in the league. Omri Caspi, like you said, knows that he's a 3-point specialist, a shooter, a stretch four, a hybrid forward. He's a role player, and he accepts that. He's gone through a lot. I mean, at this point in his career, he kind of knows that he's one step away from not being in the NBA anymore. And if he wants to be in this league long term, he has to play a role. And he's not out here to become the Israeli version of Michael Jordan anymore.
Yeah.
So, you do have a good mix of guys. Again, I think the only place where you may have some issues with that is at the shooting guard position, where you have a guy who was the number 7 pick last year in Ben McLemore, and then you got a guy who was a top pick here in a very deep draft in Nick Stauskas. Those are, you may see that. You may see some, hey, I'm trying to show that I am, a future NBA All-Star type competition there at that position. But everywhere else, I feel like they're pretty stable with guys who know their role and know what's expected of them this season.
Yeah, I agree, John. But I'll say this: the one saving grace at the shooting guard position is that the Kings have brought in guys that can actually play that position outside of those two. And
Yeah.
I think that we are going to see Sessions play a little two, play a lot of one. Collison played some two last year with the Clippers. And I think Ray McCallum is also a guy who can play some two. So realistically, you've got 3-point guards that are very versatile and can do a lot of different things. And it's something that the Kings didn't have last year. They opened the season with Gravis, and they opened the season with Isaiah Thomas. So you did have versatility. But once Gravis left, I mean, this team was Isaiah Thomas and then, literally 12 guys who couldn't even bring the ball up the floor. And it was really unfair. I think some of the judgment that's been passed on Isaiah Thomas about, how many dribbles that he actually, there are all these advanced stats you can look at, how many passes per second that he held the ball and all that stuff. It's really unfair to look at any of that because Isaiah Thomas was the single point guard on the roster for much of the season. I mean, your backups were guys like Jimmer Fredette, guys like Ray McCallum, who was a second-round pick rookie, and who ended up playing minutes late in the season. But again, this season is different. It's a more balanced roster, a more balanced attack with veteran influences at almost every single position, and I think that it can really work. And I also like that what we have is, a ton of guys fighting it out for the 1, the 2, and the 4. Like the only positions that are set on this roster are Cousins and Rudy Gay. And that means it's not just the starting jobs, but the roles in each of those positions as well, where guys will play, how many minutes they'll play, all of that stuff. It's realistically at this point, this roster has to come together quickly, but it's so different and it's a lot better balanced, and I think DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay are better players as well coming into the season.
Yes, they are.
All right, John. Well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. You got anything else?
I think we're good. I think the only major thing we have to add, found it interesting earlier this week when you asked Rudy Gay about contract talks with the Sacramento Kings.
Oh, yeah.
And, he had mentioned that they were in discussions leading up to Madrid FIBA World Cup. And since then, they've been on hold. So I find that fascinating that things are kind of slowed down there on that front. But at the same time, I'm not surprised. I think, when Rudy says that he's not focused on that right now, he's focused on training camp. I'm sure that is what he's worried about. And I think it's an assessment period for both sides.
Yeah.
We talked to Jason Ross last week, our friend over at KHTK, and he posed the possibility that, hey, if things aren't working out with this team, maybe they trade Rudy Gay at the deadline. And I don't think that's too far-fetched to believe if things really go south. So I think Rudy is at a point where he wants to see if, the culture here is for real and they are building something and they are headed in the right direction. So, and at the same time, I think the Kings want to make sure that they can get the right pieces around Rudy Gay and DeMarcus Cousins in order for it to make sense to extend him to a longer term financial contract or a financial deal. So I personally, I feel like, when it comes to Rudy's long-term future here in Sacramento, I definitely can see him being here. He's not a guy who necessarily needs to play in, the major markets like LA, Miami, Chicago, New York, whatever. He wanted to make it work in Memphis. He wanted to make it work in Toronto, and I think he wants to make it work here because they wanted him here. So,
And I'll say this too, John, on that note, like the one really difficult thing that is going to hamper an extension from happening before the season starts that people should be aware of is that the Kings are traveling to China, and the group that's traveling to China, I've heard it's something like 150 strong or 175 strong, including everyone down to like minority owners and their
they
families.
should have paid for our airfare, James.
Yeah, they should have just brought Cowbell Kingdom along with them.
I just would have wrote like a ton of positive stuff if they just like fed me, dim sum in Shanghai.
Yeah, there you go. Well, but what I've heard is that like every single day, every hour of every day is so jam-packed and crazy and wild. And that's not just for the players, because, I mean, Rudy Gay's not negotiating his contract. His agents are negotiating his contract. But Pete D'Alessandro and the entire front office are going to be in China as well. And it's almost like losing 10 days of October to something else. And realistically, I don't think anything is going to happen, during that window. If it was going to happen, it would have to happen right now, or it's going to happen like this little small window after China and before the NBA season begins. And that's really, really difficult to accomplish. And Rudy Gay said, I'm not going to get into it until it comes down to decision time. Like, this is where they're at. This is where we're at. We're both ready to make a deal. And is this something that you want to finish off? And then Rudy will make the final decision. But again, we're talking about a really, really compact schedule here. If this was going to get done, it probably should have got done a little while ago. I thought it would get done before Spain if it was going to get done because, of course, Rudy was putting himself out there. And just so people know, Rudy does have braces on his two front teeth because he did split his upper jaw in World Cup play, and so he does still have braces on. But he did talk, Sean. He talked about like he's becoming a family man, and Sacramento's a great place to raise a family. He was very honest about that, and that it is appealing to him that he's figuring out Sacramento. It's not L.A. It's not San Francisco, but he's figuring it out, and he also knows that he's a different person now. He's got a little boy. He's been married for a long time, for a couple of years, and this is sort of like the next progression, not just as a basketball player, but as a person. And you sign a long-term deal in Sacramento here. It's going to take like another 4 years. You'll be here in your 30s. This might be the place that you end up living for the next 25 years. He may end up going into the front office. These are things that you have to consider when you're a guy like Rudy Gay of his stature and of his skill. And you have to look at the big picture of how long is it that I want to be here? Is this somewhere I can see me and my family living, maybe even the rest of our lives? Because those are things you have to think of as an NBA player who makes, this year he makes $19.3 million. It's going to be a little bit about money, but it's really more going to be about, is this a place that I can win? Is this a place that I fit? Can I get along with the guys here? Are we going to win? Is this a place I can live and become, sort of part of the community going forward long term?
All right, I guess on that note, let's wrap up this edition of the Cowbell Kingdom podcast. Join us next week for another edition of the show where we'll be back. So thank you to you, James, and to our audience. I wanted to thank a guest. We don't have a guest today. So,
we had a lot to talk about, though.
We'll be back next week. So for James Ham, I'm Jonathan Santiago. Thank you for tuning in to the Cowbell Kingdom podcast.